Heyo, and welcome to Rotisserie Chicken. I'm Anna Leckie.
And I'm Jacob Worthington.
Hey, we hope that everybody's January has not been 64 days long like mine.
Why has yours been 64 days long?
Because, I don't know, the beginning of the month started all crazy and then like 30 days in, I was like, dang, this month's been like double long. It's just felt double long.
It just felt double long.
There's just been so much going on. I've been in the news, not myself, but I was
like, what?
I've had my mind grapes in the news a little too much. And I'm trying to mitigate it a little bit. I'm trying to get some distance and chillax a little bit more and, not be all up in it. You know what I'm saying?
You're trying to regulate your nervous system a little bit better?
I am, by drinking 6 cups of coffee every day.
That's good. That's how I do it. Look at me. I'm fine.
I've never been more regulated, to be honest with you. Everything's just smooth sailing from here on out.
That's good to hear.
Absolutely. So speaking of regulating yourself, the topic...
That sounded kind of dirty. Speaking of regulating yourself.
Speaking of regulating, the thing that I thought would be really interesting to talk about today, which I've been down the rabbit hole on for a few months, is this episode. I listened to this podcast last week. It's called Diary of a CEO. It's a really popular podcast. And it's the host. His name is Jack. Gosh, what's his last name? I'll find his last name at the end of this episode. But the host is named Jack. He's from the UK and he interviews these really intelligent, successful people about their life and asks them a bunch of questions. It's a very intimate human-to-human show. And a couple weeks ago, he had on the psychologist Anna Lembke.
I felt like I saw that in your notes.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like Anna misspelled her own name. She was like, yeah, we're going to be talking about Anna Lembke, this made-up persona I've created of myself.
She's my arch nemesis, actually.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she's my arch nemesis. She's the version of me that is way more accomplished out there in the world. A professor and medical director of addiction medicine at Stanford University. So she's not a psychologist. She's a medical doctor. She's a specialist in the opioid epidemic in the United States and the author of Drug Dealer MD, and has written numerous books and is well known for her study on dopamine and the effects of dopamine in the brain. So for those of you who are like, wow, this is going to be a super autistic episode, you're right. It's absolutely going to be. But I think that for what we do here on Rotisserie Chicken is we talk about these kind of current events and these ideas and things that are happening within our society and things kind of like with this strange undertone. And I know we get our tinfoil hats on a lot. I'm going to take you through kind of what she espouses on dopamine in her episode, but also link it to why our modern society and specifically the use of smartphones and constant devices is really hijacking our brains and causing nearly 95% of the people in third world countries to have addictive tendency. First world countries.
Oh, man.
First world countries. We'll cut that part out. To have addictive tendencies. So
if you want to learn more, use your smartphone to subscribe to our podcast or watch us on your YouTube app on your smartphone. Connect yourself deeper into the devices so you can learn about how they're not good for you.
We're trying to get people's brains addicted to us.
Get addicted to us.
We're trying to hack the algorithm to get the clucks that we deserve. So before we get started, do you have any preliminary thoughts, or is there anything that's kind of piquing your interest about this?
How can I be not as sad and stressed? Is that gonna help?
Yeah.
This is gonna help. All right.
Probably.
Cool. Cool. Is looking at my phone for hours up until the moment I fall asleep good?
No.
Damn. I was hoping it was.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's just jump into it. So most of the research that I've done on this is related to research from Anna Lembke's, that's so fun to say.
Anna Lembke.
Anna Lembke's book, and this episode from Diary of the CEO, which is a great listen. We'll link it in the show notes. So,
what if the guy's name was like Jack Worthington interviewing Anna Lembke? I'd be like, what the is going on?
I think his last name's Blankenship.
Okay.
Let me see.
Mariah, pull that up for us, please.
Stephen Bartlett. Oh,
Not even close.
I fucked that up.
Steven, we're sorry.
I'm so sorry, Stephen. You're the goat. All right. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that plays a role in many functions, including movement, memory, and mood. And it's known as the feel-good chemical.
All right.
Technically, if you want to get super technical, it's the only thing that motivates us, that makes us feel good, and that we actually like.
I've told you this, but I haven't told the viewers before. I was like kind of friends with a guy who worked at this gas station by my house, and I noticed he had a molecule tattooed on his arm, and I asked him what it was, and he said it's the dopamine molecule. And I said, "Oh, I like that." And he goes, "That's the only thing you like."
Yeah.
Because it is what you like. That's your brain uses that and only that to make you like things.
Yep, that's so true. So basically, you know, as I'm kind of discovering, is we're just a brain with a series of neurotransmitters that are kind of guiding us. But dopamine is released in the reward pathway of the brain. So there's a reward pathway. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so this is going to be layman's interpretation of kind of this information. But there's a reward pathway in the brain. So when you do something pleasurable, like you eat a really tasty meal, or you have sex with your partner, or you get a massage, anything that's just like super pleasurable, you get this dopamine release.
What if you're eating a meal while having sex with your partner while she massages you?
You get triple dopamine release.
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
Hell
which is
yeah.
can lead to be an issue, and we will get into that. So dopamine is functionally necessary to motivate us to pursue survival. So it motivates us to eat. If we didn't have it, we literally would not eat and we would starve and die, which was evidenced in a study with lab rats.
Did they take the dopamine from... God, we need to leave these mice alone.
The more I hear about medical studies, the more sad I get for the poor mice. But they removed the dopamine and they would put food an inch away from the mice's mouth, and the mouse just wouldn't eat. Had no interest.
Didn't have the drive.
No interest.
Oh my goodness.
So dopamine's absolutely necessary for survival. It's necessary for the reproduction of the human race, and it's necessary to propel ambition and action forward in our lives in things that pique our interest. So anytime that you get super interested or fascinated in a subject where you're watching a movie and you find it particularly interesting, and you decide you want to go do a library, you want to read books about this event, you want to do all this stuff, that's because dopamine was released in your brain while you were watching this that motivated you to continue seeking information. Dopamine also encourages movement, so it helps propel muscle movement and the brain's communication within the muscles. So if you're lacking dopamine, you can see this in diseases like Parkinson's disease, which causes motor control.
I knew that.
Yes, and the treatment, which we'll get into, has issues of itself, but the treatment for Parkinson's is typically a dopamine agonist, which...
Are we going to get into that one thing?
What one thing? That's so vague.
You know what I'm talking about.
What, when you take levodopa, you have an affair and like...
You become addicted to gay sex and gambling?
Yeah, totally. We can get into that. So, anyways, you guys get it. Dopamine makes you feel freaking great. I love it. I get some dopamine right now. I enjoy doing this podcast because it releases dopamine for me. Yeah. Yeah, I'm high as a kite right now off my dopamine.
You're zooted on your dopamine.
Zooted. So, this is the thing about the brain. it's all about balance. And this is something that Anna Lembke really, really drove home, is that we have all of this stimuli in our lives. So you wake up, you get on your smartphone, you scroll through TikTok, you go through the videos, dopamine's released, right? You eat breakfast, dopamine's released. You go shopping, dopamine's released. You get distracted by videos. There's all these things in our environment right now that cause basically an overload of pleasure. But this is an issue because the brain is all about balance. It's all about homeostasis. So one of my favorite YouTubers, Dr. Mike, who's a doctor who has a really prominent platform, talks about the body's desire for homeostasis, and that in medicine, especially osteopathic medicine, the desire is to get the body back to a proper state of homeostasis because that's where it functions the best.
Okay.
Right?
I like that.
Are you familiar with that? As a nurse, you're familiar with that principle?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the brain wants the same thing, right? I feel like I need like a chalkboard right now. I got to get really like...
Maybe we'll have chalkboard episodes in the future.
I really hope so. But so the brain wants homeostasis as well. This is the danger with drugs and anything that releases large amounts of dopamine. If you go out, if you do a lot of cocaine all at once, all this dopamine's released. There's going to be an equal and opposite reaction in the two categories of pain and pleasure. That's kind of where your brain exists when it comes to dopamine. So imagine that you have a scale. If you do something mildly pleasurable, like you eat a good breakfast, you have a couple of rocks that you put in the pleasure center, right? It doesn't offset the balance of the brain very much. The pain that you might experience later is some hunger. So you get a little hungry and then you eat, right? If you're doing drugs that release massive amounts of dopamine and you get super drunk, you put all of your rocks in this dopamine and it causes this huge imbalance. So guess what's going to happen? When this wears off, your brain is going to have depleted a lot of the dopamine, and the science behind this is really interesting because if you continually overload your brain with dopamine, the receptors for it that actually get bound decrease because your brain goes, we're getting way too much, we don't even need this much. They decrease the amount of dopamine receptors, so it kind of trains your brain to not even be able to feel as much pleasure in anything.
It's like a callus.
It's a callus,
You develop a neurotransmitter callus, I guess.
So you dull those pleasure receptors if you abuse them. So say we just did a bunch of blow, right? I wish. We'll cut that out. But say we just did a bunch of cocaine. Our levers are so imbalanced. When this wears off, when the cocaine wears off, the amount of pain and suffering that we will then experience will be comparable to the amount of pleasure that we had.
Hell yeah.
So this is the brain trying to compensate. So
what if you're like a masochist? You do a bunch of stuff, dopamine spikes, then you feel shitty, but you like how shitty it makes you feel. So is it,
dopamine spikes.
And then it's like, but then you feel shitty and then you're just like trapped in this cycle of just like, I love spiking and dropping my dopamine.
I think at that point it would be almost reversed, like your dopamine's released when you feel shitty. So when you feel good, you hit that lull. You feel shitty when you feel good.
Oh man.
Your brain feels crappy when you feel good. So it probably like reverses the cycle. So as you can probably deduce, this is how addiction kind of results, is there gets this huge imbalance where the amount of suffering or pain that ensues after a rebound of taking a substance causes, so you do this drug and you experience a lot of pain, that's going to teach your brain that you need to go back and re-seek that pleasure source to incorrect the amount of pain that you are now, or to correct the amount of pain that you're now experiencing. So there are so many things, it doesn't even have to be this idea of something extreme like cocaine or methamphetamines, which is one of the most addictive substances. Guess how many orgasms one hit of meth equates to it in terms of like the pleasure, the amount of dopamine released?
100.
10. Okay, so if you take one hit of methamphetamine, apparently it's equal to having 10 simultaneous orgasms.
God damn.
I mean, don't mind if I do. Don't mind if I do. So...
Can I say one thing real quick?
Yes, of course.
In Anna's notes, it says, has made a large amount of pleasure with minimal effort will force our Brian to immediately compensate. I guess she was typing too fast and put Brian instead of brain, which makes me think there's like a little man in my head named Brian who's like, it's all this meth this guy keeps doing. I can't compensate. And he's like trying to balance these little scales. Come on, Brian, get it together.
You're always blasting my notes. I'm just doing my best, bro. I write book reports for you guys on a weekly basis.
You know what I love about it though is that she properly capitalizes and punctuates things, but then it'll be like Brian.
Listen, I'm doing my best here. All right, so it's all about balance. This can be detrimental with extreme addictions like opioid, meth, but we are now we have more stimuli around us than we have ever had. This little thing, raise your hand on the opposite side of this podcast or this video if you are addicted to your freaking phone. If you feel extreme anxiety when you leave your phone at home, that is a form of dependency. And we're going to talk about that later on. So this idea of scarcity is something that humans were originally founded on. So our brains are essentially mismatched to the world that we now live in, which is leading to this chronically addicted state. So humans were meant to, and again, going back to that pain pleasure center, they were meant to exude maximum effort for minimum pleasure when we were first established. So think about hunter-gatherers. Think about that meal. You're starving, you're hungry, you're suffering, you're in pain, you feel weak because you haven't eaten. Guess what? You have to travel miles in difficult terrain in the cold. You have to hunt an animal using physical prowess. You exert 75% of your energy to hunt and kill this deer or gazelle or whatever. Carry it back to camp. You've suffered, you've exuded extreme amount of pain. And then when you cook your meat and you have all that, you eat it and that dopamine's released in your brain. Think about that brain scale. We have the pain and then the pleasure, and all your rocks are in that pain scale because you just exuded that. So you have more pleasure waiting for you from eating that meal. Well, think about if they had DoorDash back then. Think about if you didn't have to hunt and gather and fight for a mate and battle to the death for things.
Well, I did think about this not too long ago. I went to a milkshake shop called The Yard. Shout out The Yard. They may have one in your town.
Yeah, The Yard's good.
But they'll top your milkshake with like a whole cupcake.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like I got a milkshake already, and they were like, what topping do you want? We could top it with cupcakes, which is crazy.
No-brainer.
And when I was eating it, I was like, technically, I'm eating right now more sugar, or at least refined sugar, than most humans ate in their entire life. Because most humans are like pre-1800s, pre-sugar trade. Most people were like, oh, we got some berries this year. Isn't that awesome? I was like, fuck, no, it's not. It's not diabetes in a bottle. So. Yeah.
And that sugar releases extreme amounts of dopamine.
Hell yeah,
Sugar is a very addictive substance.
It was like 2 orgasms.
I don't know. Well, not to get into it, but...
You haven't had a gluten cupcake in a long time, so you can't really say whether or not this was 2 orgasms.
I haven't had a gluten cupcake, so maybe I'm not the best one to comment on this, but the sugar is equated to be almost as addictive as heroin within the brain, because it releases so many so much dopamine.
I know way more people who've quit heroin than I do who quit sugar.
Right?
I know one person who's quit sugar. I know like 100 people who've quit heroin. So
They out there. They out there. This element of human engineering has made a large amount of pleasure in our society with minimal effort very achievable and very attainable. But this is forcing our brains to rapidly compensate. So we're seeing, especially, in the past 20 years that technology has been on the rise, that our devices have been glued to our hands. We've seen a rise with anxiety. We've seen a rise with attention deficit disorders. Things that can be very directly related to dopamine regulation in the brain. A lot of those mental illnesses are on the rise. So, in the checks and balances of the brain, we are constantly overflowing that pleasure center, right? Why are you giggling?
I'm just giggling because now I have this image of Brian in my head, like trying to balance my checks, and he's like, "God, this guy's spending more on this meth and cocaine than we can afford." Yeah. I was like, "Sorry, Brian, I don't mean to be stressing you up there."
my little Brian's trying to quit
the whole thing.
The whole
like, Brian's like, "I'm done, dude."
My little alien driving the ship's just like, a boy.
Put a stick in.
Eject. So what was interesting is this researcher was saying that, Anna Lembke was saying that trauma can be something that predisposes us to a likelihood of addiction.
You don't say.
Because we are trying to seek those self-soothing behaviors, but honestly, in her research, she sees many people who aren't motivated by trauma, but it's just...
What's that like?
She said they could have had perfectly good parents, perfectly good homes, and their brain is just wired a certain way. So that idea of drug of choice is there's brain chemistry, and there's a 50% kind of inheritance level for certain addictive tendencies between parents and offspring. So
I was going to say, we have a friend who's a neuroscientist who studies addiction specifically. And he explained it to me one day that, like, a lot of people who are addicts, either before or...
Oh, you always damn burping, dude. I literally cannot.
I was trying so hard. Anna called me out. She goes, "You burp so much." And I was trying so hard not to burp this episode. And I made it 23 minutes.
You go, we're recording a podcast? Let me chug 3 sodas really quick.
Anyway, what I was saying was, we have a friend who is a neuroscientist who did his dissertation and studied specifically addiction. He was telling me either in addicts prior to or eventually afterwards, they have thick neural pathways for both the pleasure and habit forming. So it's kind of like, some people are genetically disposed to build muscle better. That it's just, you guys can lift the same amount of weights the same amount of times, but their body is like a hyper responder. A lot of addicts, the part of your brain that forms habit and seeks pleasure just is a hyper responder. Yeah. And so you're just predisposed. And, maybe at a different point in your life, it could have been channeled for good. You have those guys who are like master martial artists or race car drivers. But sometimes you just get introduced to something that's not as socially good, and then you're a junkie.
Yeah.
Womp womp.
I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a hyper responder.
Oh, yeah, I'm a hyper responder.
I'm not going to lie to you. And
I think my mom's a hyper responder, but she didn't get into drugs or nothing. She hyper responded to education and work. And so she got pleasure out of working and learning. And then she formed a habit and got good at it, and she just got into this, and now my mom's a bit of a workaholic.
Well, there is very real association between dopamine hits and accolades and recognition and kind of like and again, you can relate this to the pain and pleasure. You have a lot of pain in doing these really hard things, PhD, grueling research, grueling academic, you're suffering the whole time, and then you get that recognition and that accolade, and it's there's a lot of
it's like 10 orgasms.
it's 10 orgasms.
Getting your PhD is like that. You could either get a PhD or smoke meth, but they feel the same, is what I've been told.
Yeah, and this makes sense. Dr. Lembke was saying that
every time you say Dr. Anna Lembke, it just sounds like you're talking about a fake version of you.
Dr. Lembke was saying that the predisposition.
We'll cut that, or we'll put that at the beginning.
I wish I was addicted to speaking correctly.
Yeah, me too.
The proximity to addictive material will kind of obviously increase the likelihood. So Stephen Bartlett was saying that he feels like a workaholic because he
probably
is in there. So if you are in an environment that rewards long hours, rewards this kind of thing, you're more likely to get addicted to it. If you grow up in a neighborhood that has access to a lot of addicted substances, you're more likely to do it. So it's about proximity.
Well, I feel like for most people, it's about proximity. But then you always see those like My Strange Addictions, where I saw like a lady who was like addicted to like eating cotton balls.
Yeah,
and I just don't feel like she was around enough cotton balls for that to be a proximity thing. Well, you know,
I actually disagree because with a lot of those things, they link some of those addictions with interactions with that substance during some kind of pivotal,
like a traumatic or
of say somebody experiences extreme pain, but the only thing that brought them relief was fiddling with a cotton ball in between their fingers during the trauma.
I guess that's true.
And that was like
that
you're
is
experiencing
proximity.
all this pain. That was the only thing giving you a little bit of dopamine during all that.
Your Honor, I retract my previous statement.
Correct.
Maybe in the future I'll get better at editing and I can start putting sound effects. And when like Anna dunks on me, I can do like a dunking, like crowd cheering sound.
Your Brian just got dunked on.
My Brian just got dunked on.
So this is really interesting. Lembke goes on to detail this rodent experiment where again they mistreat the rodents, poor little babies, but they get these mice addicted to cocaine. Fact, mice love cocaine. All right, remember that if you ever get a house mouse, give it cocaine.
That's what they're big fans.
No, don't. So mice love cocaine. They were given this cocaine. They got addicted to it. They would go up and press a lever every day, get a little bit, press the lever. So they would just forget all the stuff in the cage, forget the other mice, forget their food, they only cared about cocaine, right?
Been there.
Well, the only way to reverse this behavior was to take away the cocaine. So after having a proper addiction formed, going up, getting cocaine every day, for about 2 weeks thereafter, they would go up and press a lever. And they would continue, and keep in mind, no cocaine was coming out, but they would still continue to press the lever looking for it for about 2 weeks. And then afterwards, they realized that they weren't going to get that anymore. They left it completely alone. Months went by. They weren't going to pursue the cocaine. They knew that chapter was closed. They'd gotten their wife back. They went to
little
kids
AA, little mouse AA meetings. They were like, or CA
They
meetings.
finally got employed at their local Mexican restaurant. They were like getting things together.
Turning it around.
They were getting things together. But the researchers realized if they provided a large, painful stimuli, so they'd shock these little mice's feet to the point where it would really like almost traumatize them. The mouse's first response, I know it's so sad, but we need to know about these things, so it's so sad. R.I.P.
Do we?
I don't know. We couldn't do this podcast without these little mices.
I hate that so what I'm guessing here is the mouse got big scared, big sad, and he turned to the thing that he cared about most in the world and tried the lever again.
Yep, the mouse got big sad after not pressing that lever for about 3 months. As soon as he experienced the painful, stressful stimuli, his first thought was, I'm going to go get some blow.
So, my question is, you say you feel bad for these mice, but we need to know these things. But the end of the research was addicts, when they get sad, will go back to doing drugs. You're like, I don't know if we needed research for that. I think most addicts would tell you
What we needed the research to show was that the brain will not reorient itself to not be predisposition to addiction once it has had addiction.
Dang.
So, and this is important because that means essentially there's no real cure if you truly have a addiction centered on dopamine. There's no real cure apart from minimizing interaction with this substance or like complete abstinence. And so the addictive impulse just flat out doesn't heal. And so this is why you hear that if somebody in recovery from alcoholism can't go casually drink after a period of sobriety, is because that's just you're gonna end up right back to where you were.
Yeah.
So over time, of course, with these addictions, seeking to overcome tolerance is something that naturally occurs to increase pleasure. So as you burn out all these reward systems, you burn out all these rewards, you're indulging in your addiction, something that occurs is changing elements of the use to try to get a little bit more pleasure, because you get dulled out. It's like the subject matter you're consuming, you want wilder, crazier subject matter because your brain just gets used to things, so you'll pornography is a really good example of people who have porn addictions. I don't know, I don't struggle with that, luckily, but people,
yeah, me neither.
People will watch content, and over time it won't be enough, and they'll have to go to wilder and wilder and crazier content. And sometimes this could veer off into really dangerous territory in order to like feel a certain way.
I think pornography is one of the tough ones because it's like with drugs, yeah, sometimes.
Sorry.
Settle down, champ.
Sorry, but my dopamine.
Yeah, with drugs, sometimes you'll be somewhere where you'll be getting like a lesser drug, and then there might be another, substance there. You're buying weed or you're drinking, and there might be like cocaine or something like that.
Right word, party.
But with pornography, it's like you may be looking at just like the weed missionary version of porn, but then there's like a bubble box of like cocaine, and then another bubble box of like crack, and then meth, and then you're doing like the crocodile equivalent version of pornography, because it is a streamlined pipeline to keep you in the game.
And often with addictions that go unchecked, there are consequences. With sex addiction, people have been known to venture into really unsafe territory.
I bet.
Or taking risks that they wouldn't have normally taken, that sometimes can land them in jail. And it's very scary. So this kind of novelty aspect can really influence this. So the reason that all of this is so interesting to me is because certain companies and the evolution of tech have figured out how to really hack into that dopamine part of our brain, which has been throughout the course of business. I mean, think about the
that's all modern advertising.
Oxycontin.
Modern advertising is all about hacking the psyche so that you create a desire for something that only that product will relieve.
Yeah. What's the name of the family that made
the Sacklers?
The Sacklers. Think about the Sacklers. They understood this addictive tendency.
What pieces of shit those fucking guys were.
Absolutely. I mean, but if companies learn how to capitalize on addiction, you have a repeat constant customer. You have a constant stream of income, and you also have power over people if you can hack that little piece. So phone addictions and social media addiction is something I'm trying to work on, because I've realized that I've had a really bad habit of scrolling through my phone before bed, and I feel a little addicted to it. I honestly do. This TikTok algorithm, what TikTok has figured out, that with people who get these short little hits, is they perfected that sense of giving people what's going to release the most dopamine individually, tailoring these algorithms, then upping the ante, giving them things that will introduce a new sense of novelty here and there. Just like I said, when you get tolerant to something, you need to introduce new stimuli, giving them novelty, changing content enough to keep it interesting, offering something a little strange or a little extreme. They have perfected hijacking our dopamine centers. So we're craving looking at our phones, going through these really short bursts of videos. But this can be scary.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I know that you've been like espousing feeling like stressed and worried and like sad. But then also I'll get all these memes you sent me right before you went to bed, or videos where it's just like sad news about how like bad things are happening in the world. I'm like, well, you're just running through like depression porn on your apps right before you fall asleep, and you're like, I'm just not sleeping well. I'm like having these nightmare and stress dreams. You're like, yeah, I can see why.
Yeah. And I've struggled with addiction so much in the past with substances and certain things, and I have a very addictive brain. I have very addictive tendencies.
Dude, her Brian is working.
And my Brian is just tired.
Dude, he's exhausted.
So tired. I now am completely sober. I don't do any drugs. I don't smoke. I don't even eat freaking gluten, dude. I don't even eat that much sugar. But this phone, this compulsion really gets me. And I know everyone around me is in the same boat. And it's that same principle that we're getting those rewards. Well, guess what it's doing? It's equal and opposite reaction on the pain side. So it's causing us to get more uncomfortable, more anxious, more unsettled, more restless when we're not getting that. But what happens when you abuse this right to kind of the populace's attention? I should put my little hat on. But what if propaganda starts being integrated into this algorithm?
Yeah, what if? I mean, we know it has it.
It is.
I know we know it has it, but what if they were using it for propaganda?
Well, because of this dopamine piece, media has more attention and more control over the minds of these users than they ever had.
I mean, that's why they wanted to ban TikTok. They wanted to ban TikTok because they were worried that it would, that the Chinese were using it to like infiltrate our homes and like brainwash our people. And my friend said that they banned TikTok, and he came home and his wife was on Red Note. She had downloaded the Chinese version of TikTok, and she was learning Chinese so she could use the app.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think they're right. That she was so addicted that she's like, I guess I'm Chinese now because I can't not have TikTok.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not for banning TikTok. I disagreed with that, but it is important to know that because, and it's not just TikTok, there's other algorithms and it's the same principle, but if you are able to either pacify groupthink, radicalize groupthink, or have this access to people in this kind of way and what you're subjecting your brain to, this is a perfectly tailored organism, I use that term lightly, to influence you.
I will say, as a expert in the field, as a former psychological operations specialist, I would kill.
Which that's not a joke, you actually were.
Yes.
I feel like some people would think
some
that's
people might be like, no. But I and everybody I used to work with, we would kill to have something so effective in the hands of the population that we were trying to manipulate. If I could make like a American-controlled Afghan TikTok that got everybody, especially the young people, addicted to it, and I could just slowly tweak the feeds so that they see more like either pro-America or anti-Taliban stuff, or just introduce Western cultural ideas and start to kind of phase out their traditional like Pashtun Wali culture, then Oh, yeah. Especially the youth. Dude, the youth are easily
I feel like I'm falling out of my damn chair.
manipulated.
Well, yeah. And I mean...
And that's 100% going on through TikTok.
It is.
At least with American companies.
And I mean, in social media, just in general. Like, yes.
Most American companies, or at least they're just trying to do it to get you to spend money. But the Chinese government is trying to get it so that they could topple the American control of the world and become the number one.
Well, you know.
But Anna's got to have her fucking cat videos. She got to have her little fucking...
They're great. It's like 10 orgasms, one video.
Scary stories. Try not to get scared.
One cat video.
There I was yorking my Peter.
Take him to the peanut.
All of a sudden, Larry.
So, how do we fix this? Dr. Lembke recommends 30 days of abstinence away from a stimuli to get your brain back to baseline. That's hard. She said when you've experienced that addiction or reliance upon something, whether it be weed or your cell phone or shopping or love addiction, sex addiction, when you seek to put some distance between yourself and that stimuli, you will notice agitation, restlessness, insomnia. That pain lever is overcompensating for all of the misuse of those dopamine receptors. And it's going to take you about 30 days to get your brain not compulsively seeking that out, which is tough, but necessary.
I will say in the addiction community, there's a tendency to kind of represent your addiction as like this other entity that like exists within you. It's like my addiction is trying to, and I think that's so apt because when you have an addiction and then you start to make an attempt to kind of get away from it, it does feel like there's this other thing inside your head being like, come on, man. Come on, buddy. You know, we can just a little bit. We can just, and it's almost like this thing that you weren't aware was there when you start to kind of create distance will pop up and start trying to convince you how like you don't need to taper back. You know, you're fine. You can just do a little bit of cell phone.
It's those dopamine receptors in the reward pathway going, where it at, bro?
It's scary. It's scary to feel like there's like this other thing trying to drive you.
We're just a Brian.
In a
little shit.
Dude, Brian's overworked, but when you try to take away his addiction, he gets real feisty about it.
He's short. He's shooting people over it, dude. So this is also really, really awesome. And this is something I was thinking about a lot. And I actually thought about you when researching this, is Dr. Lembke expresses that the same principle goes both ways on the pain-pleasure scale, where if you put more struggle, more intensity, more hard work, you will have greater pleasure on the opposite end of this. And so ice water baths, fasting, hard exercise, like actually getting out and doing really physically grueling, hard workouts, HIIT workouts, it's been shown that it will increase dopamine levels towards the latter half of those workouts, and dopamine levels will remain elevated in the brain for hours after a hard workout. So where constantly seeking out pleasure with minimal effort will cause you more pain in the long run. Doing hard work, doing hard things, these long grueling hikes, walking maybe a couple miles to your grocery store,
folding your laundry, you know, just stuff that's impossible to really think about doing.
I'm not there yet.
Oh, okay.
I'll be there one day.
Anna has like the Mount Everest of laundry now.
I do.
But
I'm gonna do that after this bit.
Do you think that's why I'm such a happy camper all the time? Is because I like to go out and physically abuse myself through exercise?
Well, there's a balance. It's all about the homeostasis. But I do think that your tendency to seek out more painful, more difficult situations could actually be good for your brain.
I think it is. I think it 100% is. Nothing makes me happier than doing something completely terrible and nightmarish. Like when I ran, what did I do? I did like 12 miles in the snow a couple weeks ago, and I was so joyous, happy, and free. about halfway into it. Once like my body started to warm up,
dopamine levels rose.
I'm sure dopamine levels, but like once my body like started to warm itself, it just felt so cool to be out there, just knowing that a lot of people would fucking hate this, but yet I'm somehow able to persevere. Just kind of.
What you did is you allowed your brain to feel pleasure to a greater degree, and to increase dopamine progressively after that. And really, I had a psychologist tell me one time, because I was kind of struggling with this level of apathy and just not really feeling connected, and he was saying that in the shower, to shock for 5 seconds, shock myself with really cold water, because it'll release endorphins and dopamine for the rest of the day. Well, not for the rest of the day, but like to kind of readjust my brain. So there's this really prevalent idea of doing harder things. And Dr. Lembke said, don't organize your life around rewards. Appreciate the struggle and intolerance to discomfort. And I think it's a really natural inclination. I see this in myself as well. If you're going into something hard, if you're really nervous about something you have to do, maybe it's a work thing, it's really natural to have our brains go, I wish I could just fast forward this. I can't wait to just be completely done with this. Then I can go self-soothe. I can go relax. I can go do that pleasurable thing I really want to do, zone out on my phone or whatever. Don't wish your life away. Be in those moments. Be in that discomfort and be open to whatever comes, and don't try to control your pain levels. And ultimately, our brains will be healthier for it. It's uncomfortable to be alive, as Dr. Lembke said point blank. It just is uncomfortable. And we live in a society where pleasure and stimuli is so readily available that it's inherently and ironically leading us to live more pacified and unhappy lives. It's leading to an unhappier populace because there's not as much glorification of the struggle.
I do feel like we're trending towards like a cyberpunk dystopia. Like whenever you watch the cyberpunk dystopia, like either like animes or movies or video games, it's always like everything is like flashing lights, holograms, things that used to be like illegal or like kind of taboo, like vice stuff is just like out open on the street. Everybody is like using like these like new drugs, or it's like now we pipe TV into your brain while you sleep, so you'll never miss. It's like that's like what like a lot of futurism trends to, and it does kind of I mean, go to Times Square, you know what I mean? Times Square looks like crazy, Vegas, Tokyo I hear Tokyo is a lot like that.
Well, a really interesting point, and something that they were kind of talking about was, has society gone soft? We live in we live in a society where everything's traumatic. Everything's, let's be gentle with each other. Let's, you have this trauma, therefore you can check out, and almost this like victim mentality, which not displacing or invalidating shit. I've been through a lot of shit. Okay. I've been through a lot of crazy stuff, a lot in the past few years. But I think resilience is key here. Resiliency from hard things is actually very, very good for your brain, and understanding that maybe even going through harder things in life will give you a greater ability to find happiness.
I agree with that. I kind of disagree on like, are we soft? Because I think on one level, yes, we are soft. I don't think a lot of us have like that go out and farm and forage through the wilderness, But what I will say, the things we have to deal with, we're not evolutionarily designed for. And I was thinking about this, is that if like a early human had to like do what you gotta do to go get your driver's license, they would kill themselves. They would either kill themselves or attack. They're like, what do you mean I need another one of these forms? It's like, actually, you need 6 forms. You're like, well, what do you, like, I have to keep track of like 14 passwords in my head, and that's something no one ever needed to do, ever. Like, yeah, I had to track a buffalo and kill him and drag him back and then eat him. But I didn't have to like itemize the buffalo and turn it into the IRS so they could come get their, you know what I mean? Like that, I think we are in a society where we are dying like death by 1,000 little bureaucratic cuts.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really, I think when people are like, they're breaking down because they have to fold their laundry, I think that is just the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. And what you're really stressing out is about all the complex technological bureaucratic complexity that you're constantly having to like fight through on a daily basis is so insurmounting, and you're unaware of it, and you're like, I don't know why I'm losing my mind, but my Brian is like freaking out, dude.
My Brian's just out here just
sometimes it feels good to just go out and have like a tough thing that's a physical thing.
Yeah.
It's like, carry this heavy fucking thing.
It's very good for you. The rise of ultra marathons has been,
I love it.
I think there's like an 1,000% increase in like the number of people who have done ultra marathons, like in the past 10 years or something like that. But
I want to do more, but Anna says that they're not good for my bones.
I think it depends on whoever, but it can be hard on your body for sure. So I want to end with this, and this is kind of what my fear of seeing this device, smartphone technocracy that we have going on. What's going to happen in 10, 20 years when there's growing technology and VR gets better and you have this growing stimuli and everything's automated? The fear, and some people are already living like this actually, is that what naturally we have to do to get those rewards we won't need because we can have it simulated. And it's almost like if you live completely in VR in this dark basement and you're just strapped to this thing all day, and you have your human relationships through this VR, you have your food delivered to your door, you don't have to leave, you have sex provided you by some robot, it's like all these things are so automated. And my fear is that people will lack the motivation to live life so apart from that, and I think that's like a very extreme example of something that could be seen, but that's a fear.
I think there are already people who exist that way though.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's an unjustified fear. I think there are plenty of people who just sit at home and they either live in their parents' basement or they live in it with a bunch of roommates, and their life is just centered around making exactly how much money they need to keep on their little dopamine trains. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's centered around either online video game stuff, nothing wrong with it, but if that's like your entire life is like the video game persona, and then you don't have any like real relationships, and like your sexual interactions are all pornographic, and I just live to kind of fuel this dopamine response, you're that rat pulling that fucking lever. Also, leave them mice alone.
Leave them alone.
Leave them alone.
They just got the jobs back.
They just got. Imagine being a little mice and you're like, hey, Mark, I just got a new job at that scientific facility. You're like, oh, that's cool. What are they gonna do? It's like, I don't know yet, but I'm really excited about it.
PETA just shows up.
PETA, help.
One thing I'm gonna try and do, I think getting out in nature, doing the grueling things, the exercise.
Come do a Spartan race with me again.
That was a little too far for me, but trying to unsoften myself up. I live a pretty soft life.
She's a soft little baby.
I plan on reading How to Break Up with Your Phone.
Oh, I was like getting worried until I heard the phone part.
How to Break Up with Your Phone, which is a book, you can deduce the rest. But I want to, this podcast was so helpful because I want to be mindful about how I'm tipping the scales in the wrong way. And I just want to appreciate the struggle a little bit more.
Yeah. Get out in the grind. I think I'm crushing this. I think I'm pretty. I have like a little bit of addiction on the cell phone stuff, but I don't think it's like super bad. I would love to just not have it most of the time. I hate the fact that people can get in contact with me, whatever. I do need to get more involved, unfortunately, with social media because my aspirations are heavily tied towards an internet presence.
That's a hard part.
Yeah. So the comedy scene as well as the podcast community exists hand in hand with Instagram and TikTok and Spotify. And so I've got to be more participatory in that space.
We can't do RCP if we can't distribute it, bro.
Yeah, then we're just yelling into the empty, vacuous abyss that is reality, and I've done enough of that.
But that would be painful, so does that mean that it would be, like, extra pleasurable?
Yeah, I guess. I guess.
Yeah. You guys get it.
You guys get it.
Yeah, we'll link the episode down below, and a thank you to Anna Lembke and Stephen Bartlett for talking about this in depth, and I highly recommend listening to that episode and then checking out Anna Lembke's book, Dopamine Nation, and yeah.
Stop it.